All right, buckle up, everybody. Today we're going on a deep dive exploring a topic that's super close to, well, my heart at least. We're going to be taking a close look at how cannabinoids can impact your cardiovascular system.
It's an area of research that I find really fascinating, too.
Yeah, I bet. I mean, we're talking blood pressure, heart rate, even the health of our blood vessels.
And the research you've gathered is amazing. We're going to be able to go deep into the molecular level, talking about CB1 and CB2 receptors and all the intricacies of GPCR activation.
Oh, yeah. Definitely looking forward to that.
Yeah.
But before we get lost in the weeds, can we just step back for a second?
Yeah.
For those of us who might not be PhDs in cardiology.
Sure. What's the big picture here?
Exactly.
Well, you can think of the cardiovascular system as like the transportation network of your body.
Okay.
It's responsible for delivering oxygen and nutrients to every single cell.
Right.
And what's so fascinating is that cannabinoids like THC or CBD can actually influence how this entire network functions.
It's not just about, feeling high or relaxed.
Not at all. We're talking about real physiological effects on things like blood flow, heart rhythm, and even the health of those blood vessels.
Wow. I mean, that's pretty mind-blowing when you think about it. But these cannabinoids are interacting with the very infrastructure of our bodies.
They really are. And the more we learn about these interactions, the more we realize just how powerful they can be.
Yeah, I was reading some of the studies you sent over, and there's this whole section on how machine learning is being used to classify cannabinoid receptors.
Oh, yeah, that's some really cutting-edge stuff. What's interesting is that traditional bioinformatics approaches haven't always been that effective.
So you're saying AI is stepping in to help us understand these receptors better?
Precisely. And the reason that's so important is because the better we understand these receptors, the more targeted we can be with potential therapies.
I see.
So we're talking about the potential to develop drugs that could very specifically target certain receptors in the cardiovascular system.
Okay, so less side effects, more targeted treatment.
Yep.
Wow, that's amazing.
This is really precision medicine in action.
So it sounds like these receptors are really the key to unlocking the potential of cannabinoids, especially when it comes to treating cardiovascular issues.
Yeah, they're a crucial piece of the puzzle, that's for sure.
Okay, so let's talk about how these receptors actually work.
Right.
I remember from way back in my biochemistry days that GPCRs are these massive protein complexes. They, sneak through the cell membranes, but it's all a little fuzzy now.
Yeah, it can be a complicated topic.
Do you think you could give us a little refresher?
Absolutely. So let's imagine a CB1 or CB2 receptor embedded right in the membrane of a heart muscle cell.
All right. Got it.
Now, picture a cannabinoid molecule.
Like THC.
Sure. THC is a great example. Picture it approaching this receptor.
Okay.
And it's almost like a key fitting into a lock.
Right.
And when that cannabinoid binds, it triggers this whole cascade of events.
So the cannabinoid is the key, and it unlocks a change in the receptor itself.
You got it. The receptor actually undergoes what we call a conformational change.
So it shifts its shape a bit to make room for the cannabinoid.
That's a great way to think about it. And this change, it really sets the whole activation process in motion.
Gotcha. So what happens next? Does the receptor just kind of sit there, stuck to the cannabinoid?
Oh, not at all. The activated receptor, it acts like a beacon, and it attracts another really important player in this whole cellular drama. And that player is called a G protein.
A G protein. Okay, I've heard of those, but remind me, what exactly are they?
So G proteins are made up of these different subunits. We call them alpha, beta, and gamma.
Okay.
And they just kind of hang out near the cell membrane. In their inactive state, they're bound to a molecule called GDP.
So the G protein's just waiting for its cue.
Right, like a backup dancer.
Exactly.
And the cue comes from the activated receptor.
Right.
The receptor binds to that G protein, causing it to swap out its GDP for another molecule called GTP.
Okay, so that's kind of like giving the G protein a jolt of energy.
That's a great way to put it. It activates the G protein and sets off this whole chain reaction.
Okay, so we've got the molecular swap, the G protein's all energized. What happens next in this intricate dance?
Well, remember those different subunits we talked about?
The alpha, beta, and gamma.
Exactly. Once the G protein is activated, the alpha subunit breaks free from the others.
Okay.
And it takes that GTP molecule with it.
Got it. So now this alpha subunit can interact with other proteins inside the cell.
Yes. And that's what triggers this whole cascade of signaling events.
It's like a domino effect.
Exactly.
And what happens next depends on which type of alpha subunit is involved.
Precisely. There are several different subtypes, each with their own kind of signaling preferences.
I see.
So you have subtypes like gene, Goyo, and Gus.
Okay. And each one triggers something a little different.
Exactly. For example, Guinea often leads to a decrease in a molecule called CAM-MP, which is like a cellular messenger. It regulates all sorts of processes, including heart rate.
So depending on which G protein is activated, cannabinoids could actually influence things like the pace of our heartbeat.
They certainly can.
Wow.
And it doesn't stop there. Those other subtypes, like Gaio,
Yeah.
they can influence calcium channels.
And those are
They're essential for muscle contraction.
including the contractions of our heart muscle.
Yes!
Oh, wow. So now we're talking about cannabinoids potentially influencing the very force with which our hearts beat.
We are. And it's important to remember that all these pathways are interconnected, creating this incredibly complex network of cellular responses.
Right. It's like a delicate dance.
Exactly. It really is a delicate balancing act with all these different players. You have the different cannabinoids, the different G protein subtypes. They're all pushing and pulling on various aspects of cardiovascular function.
This is definitely more complicated than I realized. But man, it's fascinating. How do researchers even begin to untangle all of this?
Well, it takes a multifaceted approach.
Okay.
They use all sorts of techniques.
Okay.
Everything from studying isolated cells in the lab to conducting those large-scale clinical trials in humans.
Yeah.
And it's this very meticulous research that's helping us to understand not only how cannabinoids are impacting the cardiovascular system, but also how we might be able to harness their potential for therapeutic purposes.
This has been so much more than I expected already. We've gone from the basics of cannabinoid receptors all the way to the intricacies of G protein activation. But I'm sure there are plenty more surprises in store as we delve deeper into this research.
You're absolutely right. In the next part of our deep dive, we're going to explore those downstream signaling pathways like MAPK,
Okay.
and we'll see how they connect this intricate cellular dance to the actual real-world effects of cannabinoids. Blood pressure, heart rate, even vascular inflammation. It's going to be a fascinating journey.
Well, I'm ready. I can't wait. All right, so we've gone through all these cellular processes, these activations and cascades, and I'm ready to see how this all plays out in the real world. Like, how does all this actually translate into changes in our cardiovascular health?
Well, that's really the question, isn't it? And thankfully, the research you've pulled together gives us some pretty interesting clues. So why don't we start with blood pressure?
Okay, yeah, blood pressure, I mean, that's a big one.
It is. It's one of the most important indicators of overall cardiovascular health. And it seems like cannabinoids can have a kind of surprising effect there.
Oh, surprising. In what way?
Well, you would think that something like THC, which most people associate with getting high, you'd think it would send your blood pressure through the roof.
Right, yeah, I'd assume so.
And initially, it kind of can. Some studies show a slight increase in both blood pressure and heart rate right after you consume THC.
Oh, so like a fight or flight response.
Exactly. But here's the thing. After that initial spike, blood pressure often drops below baseline.
Huh, so almost like a rebound effect.
Yeah, you could think of it that way. And this drop, it seems to be linked to the activation of CB1 receptors, particularly the ones that are found outside the central nervous system.
So cannabinoids could have this kind of dual effect on blood pressure.
That's what the research seems to suggest. And it's not limited to just THC.
Oh.
Other cannabinoids like CBN seem to show a similar pattern. So this has led researchers to look into whether cannabinoids could actually be used to treat hypertension, where blood pressure is chronically high.
I mean, if they could, that would be huge, right?
It could. Hypertension is a major health problem. But I do have to say there are also some potential risks to consider.
Oh, yeah, of course. Like what?
Well, some research suggests that really heavy cannabinoid use could actually be linked to tachycardia.
Tachycardia, that's a rapid heart rate, right?
That's right. And that could be especially dangerous for someone who already has a heart condition.
Yeah, their heart's already working overtime.
Exactly. And then you also have the issue of vasodilation.
Vasodilation, remind me.
So that's the widening of your blood vessels.
Right, right.
And cannabinoids can trigger that,
Okay.
which can be helpful in some cases, but it can also cause a sudden drop in blood
Oh,
pressure.
that's not good.
No, it can lead to dizziness, feeling lightheaded, even fainting.
So it seems like there's this, potential for benefit, but also a risk if things aren't approached carefully.
You've got it. That's why it's so important to be cautious with cannabinoid use, especially if you already have any cardiovascular issues. And honestly, talking to a doctor is always a good idea.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so we talked about blood pressure. What about heart rate? Does it follow a similar pattern, like the spike and then the dip?
Sometimes it can, but the effects on heart rate are a little more variable.
Okay.
Depends on a lot of things,
Like,
the specific cannabinoid, the dose, the person's individual sensitivity. It really runs the gamut. Remember our discussion about the different G protein subtypes?
oh, right, the DIO, GIO, GAS, and how some of them can influence calcium channels.
Exactly. And those calcium channels, they're like the conductors of your heart's rhythm.
Okay.
Even small changes in those calcium levels can really impact the pace and the force of your heartbeat.
Right, right.
So when you have cannabinoids potentially modulating those channels through those G protein activations, well, it's no surprise that we see these fluctuations in heart rate.
This is so complicated. But with all this variability, like, how do we even begin to figure out the true impact of cannabinoids on our hearts?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It's a puzzle with many pieces, and thankfully there are brilliant scientists out there working to put it all together. They're looking at all the different factors, the receptor subtypes, the signaling pathways, even genetic variations.
So they really are like detectives.
They are.
Yeah.
They're tracing the clues from the cellular level all the way up to the whole body effects.
It's amazing. And hopefully all this research will lead to better, more personalized treatments down the line.
I think so too. Imagine being able to tailor a cannabinoid treatment based on someone's specific genetic makeup and their individual cardiovascular profile.
Wow, that would be incredible.
It really would.
Okay, so we've covered blood pressure, heart rate, but what about vascular inflammation? That seems like a whole other layer of complexity.
You're telling me. And yes, there's some really interesting research happening in that area too.
Okay, so remind me, what is vascular inflammation exactly?
Well, it's a key player in the development of atherosclerosis.
Atherosclerosis, that's the buildup of plaque in the arteries, right?
You got it. And that buildup increases the risk of heart attack and stroke.
Right, okay.
And there's growing evidence that cannabinoids might actually play a role in modulating this inflammatory response.
Hold on, isn't inflammation a natural process? I mean, don't our bodies need it to heal?
You're absolutely right. Inflammation is essential for a healthy immune response.
Okay.
But the problem is when it becomes chronic or excessive.
So too much of a good thing. So in the case of atherosclerosis, it's like the inflammation is actually doing more harm than good.
You nailed it.
Okay.
And that's where cannabinoids might come in. Remember the MAPK pathways we discussed earlier?
Oh, right, the ERK, JNK,
Yeah.
P38 pathways.
Yes.
And those are like the communication highways of the cells.
They are, and they can influence things like gene expression and inflammation.
Right.
And some studies are showing that cannabinoids may be able to modulate these pathways.
So they're dampening down the excessive inflammatory response.
Exactly. It's like they're preventing the fire from spreading.
Wow. So cannabinoids could actually be protecting the blood vessels from damage?
That's the idea,
I see.
and it gets even more interesting.
Oh, yeah.
Cannabinoids might also exert their anti-inflammatory magic through their interaction with CB2 receptors
CB2 receptors, where are those found?
on immune cells.
Okay, so now we have the MEPK pathways acting like firefighters, and the CD2 receptors are kind of like the peacekeepers.
That's a great way to think about it.
And how do they work?
Well, during inflammation, your immune system sends out signals to call more immune cells to the area.
Right, to deal with the problem.
But sometimes this can get out of hand, and the immune response becomes excessive.
I see.
So what CB2 receptors may do is calm things down a bit,
Okay, reducing the excessive immune cells.
Right. Which in turn, hopefully prevents further damage.
So we're talking multiple ways that cannabinoids could influence vascular inflammation.
That's right. And researchers are really excited about the potential of cannabinoids as anti-inflammatory agents.
And what does that mean in terms of like real-world treatments?
It means that there's a lot of potential for developing new therapies for all sorts of cardiovascular diseases. They're looking at different cannabinoids, different dosages, different ways to administer them.
This is all so interesting. Can we step back for a moment and think about the bigger picture here? Like, what does all this research mean for us in our daily lives?
Well, I think it shows that we need to view cannabinoids in a more nuanced way, not just as recreational drugs or even just potential medicines. They're powerful molecules that can affect the very systems that keep us alive.
Right.
So it's not about saying cannabinoids are good or bad. It's
Yeah.
about understanding their complexity and then using that knowledge responsibly.
So recognizing they can have both benefits and risks.
Exactly. And understanding that those effects can really vary from person to person, depending on things like dosage and all sorts of other factors.
This has honestly been such a fascinating deep dive. I feel like we've uncovered this whole hidden world within our own bodies, like this incredibly intricate system that can be influenced by cannabinoids. And I think I've gained a whole new appreciation for just how powerful and complex these molecules are.
I agree. The research you shared really highlights just how much potential this field has
Okay.
and the importance of continued research to really unlock the therapeutic possibilities of cannabinoids.
Yeah, and to ensure that we're using them safely and responsibly.
Ab-
All right, well, I am ready for the final part of this deep dive.
Me too. There are some exciting new developments in this field that I can't wait to discuss.
Sounds good. Okay, I'm back and ready for more. That was a lot to take in. All that stuff about blood pressure, heart rate, and inflammation. It's crazy to think that these tiny little cannabinoid molecules can have such a huge impact on our cardiovascular system.
It really is incredible. You know, it speaks to just how complex and interconnected our bodies really are.
Yeah, totally. And what's even more exciting is that we're really just starting to understand what cannabinoids can do.
Exactly.
Like the research you gave me hints at some really groundbreaking therapeutic possibilities.
Oh, absolutely.
For example, I was reading about the potential of cannabinoids to treat heart failure.
Yeah, that's a big one.
It is. And I'm curious, how could cannabinoids even help with something like that?
Well, heart failure is a really complex condition, right?
Yeah.
It's where the heart muscle weakens and it can't pump blood as efficiently as it needs to.
Yeah.
And current treatments, they often have limitations.
Okay.
But some promising preclinical studies are showing that cannabinoids might offer a whole new way to treat it.
Really? What have they found?
Well, in animal models of heart failure, cannabinoids have actually been shown to improve heart function.
Wow, that's amazing.
They seem to work by reducing inflammation in the heart muscle, improving blood flow, and even protecting the heart cells from more damage.
That's incredible. Are there any human trials going on to look into these effects?
Yeah, actually, there are a number of clinical trials that in various stages, but they're all exploring the potential of cannabinoids for treating heart failure.
Okay.
It's still early, but the initial results are looking pretty good.
That's really encouraging to hear. Not just for heart failure patients, but for anyone dealing with serious cardiovascular issues.
Right.
You know, I also remember reading something about cannabinoids and stroke, like that they might actually reduce the risk.
Yeah, there's some really fascinating research coming out about that. A lot of it focuses on the neuroprotective effects of cannabinoids.
Neuroprotective, so protecting the brain.
Exactly. Studies have shown that in animal models, cannabinoids can reduce the amount of brain damage that happens after a stroke.
Wow, that's amazing. How do they do that?
Well, it seems like they activate several pathways that can shield those brain cells from the damage that a stroke causes.
All right.
They can reduce inflammation, get rid of those harmful free radicals, and they can even promote the growth of new brain cells.
That's incredible. So we're talking about cannabinoids potentially protecting the brain before, during, and even after a stroke.
It's definitely a possibility, but I do want to add a little bit of caution here.
Oh, sure.
A lot of these studies are still in the early stages. We need more research to really confirm these findings.
Right.
And we need to figure out the right doses and the best ways to administer them to humans.
Okay, I understand. But even the fact that this is a possibility is pretty amazing.
Oh, absolutely.
Honestly, this whole deep dive has been eye-opening. I feel like I've learned so much, from the tiny little workings of our cells to the potential for these revolutionary new treatments. It's been a wild ride.
It has been. And it's really highlighted how powerful these molecules are, but also how much more we need to learn.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I want to thank you for taking the time to walk me through all this. I feel like I have a whole new understanding of cannabinoids and what they can do.
You're very welcome. It's always fun to dive into these topics with someone who's as curious and engaged as you are.
And to everyone listening, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of cannabinoids and heart health. I hope you learned as much as I did. You know, knowledge is power, and the more we understand about our own bodies, the better decisions we can make about our health. So stay curious, keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.